Okay, let's get. So, welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Way Forward community after a while. This time it's being held online due to the coronavirus, obviously. Today, the Way Forward community is a platform for software professionals to discover and explore new trends in the technology field, learn from one another, get inspired, and have fun with fellow professionals. The meetup today is being sponsored by Evan8, so thanks Evan8 for sponsoring us. I have a happy news to share, and the happy news is that we have a giveaway of 3 books, and we're going to give away 3 books at the end of this presentation. So if you will wait until the Q&A session, and if you're gonna share some questions, and the organizers are gonna pick 3 best questions, and you will get 3 books, all of them about software engineering, about testing, and about the software architecture. So it's worth to wait, and I can highly recommend them. So yeah, we're gonna have about 30-40 minutes of this presentation and the Q&A session. So if there's anything you wanted to ask, you can do it then. Okay, so today we are going to talk about digital nomads and how to become one. So who are digital nomads? Digital nomads are people who choose to embrace a location-independent, technology-enabled lifestyle that let them travel and work remotely wherever they are. So it's usually people who rely more or less on technology and working on their computers, and that's great because most of the time they can choose to stay in their hometown, their country of origin, but they can also change the location. Very often they don't need to rely on the computer. They are fine with using a tablet or a smartphone, which is also new. The plan for the presentation today is I'm gonna start with some statistics, and then I will tell you what are the ways I would recommend to get a remote job. I'm gonna tell you about the geo arbitrage. I'm going to recommend some destinations popular among digital nomads. I'm gonna tell you about different approaches to traveling, and then about different problems that we deal with and how to overcome them. And then I'm gonna recommend some online communities that I use a lot, and resources that you could find useful. And we're gonna finish with the Q&A. But first, before I start, I just wanted to share a personal story. The personal story how I became a digital nomad. It's gonna be just one minute, just to tell you why am I telling you about that. Originally, I was born in a small town in southern Poland, about 30,000 people, and I was going to a local primary school, and then I discovered web technologies and programming. I started learning using some materials online, and after a few years of learning from materials available online, I started remotely, first as a freelancer. At first, I was usually using online job boards to get some smaller projects, and then in in 2006, I started collaborating with a company that started helping me, contacting me with different clients in different countries. So I started working remotely full-time back then. After 4 years of working remotely in 2010, I started traveling quite heavily, but still I kept my home base in Krakow. I was still attending university, so it was only a couple of trips every year. And then 4 years later, in 2014, I became a digital nomad by selling some of my bigger possessions, by leaving things behind, by not having a base anymore. Although I did have a family house, I wouldn't really stay there too often. So I no longer had my apartment in Krakow, and I left everything behind, as I said, and I started traveling. That was 2014, and since then I've traveled to over 50 countries. I think it's 52, although I agree that the number of countries doesn't really matter. What matters is that I didn't have anything behind me, so I felt, totally free. I was able to travel spontaneously, buying one-way tickets, and I lived between a couple of different countries for a longer time. Like I spent half a year in the States, 3 months in Hong Kong, a couple of months between different and other countries in Asia, like in Thailand, and also a couple of months in Spain, Canary Islands, couple of months traveling across Southern America, a couple of months in Africa, actually, including 1 month in Kenya, 5 weeks in South Africa. So literally all over the place. And I'm telling you that because I also agree that there's no point in trying to travel quickly, because the only way to learn more about the given country is to spend more time in it, is to get immersed in the local culture and the community, and learn, and to get to know local people. And this is the only way how you can actually learn so much new things when you travel. So I highly recommend slow travel. And then 6 years later, so actually earlier this year, I started my own podcast and newsletter about working remotely and being a digital nomad. So and also I just recently started a vlog. So I'm currently in sunny Portugal, in Algarve. I've been here for about 2 months now, and it's beautiful. I wish I could show you the neighborhood, but yeah, I love being here in Portugal. And yeah, you can check out the podcast or the vlog if you're interested in hearing more about my adventures. But we're not here to talk about me. The cool thing about traveling and about meeting other digital nomads is the fact that it's such a diverse group of people. So I took a look at some stats, and I was able to find that currently still only 30% of digital nomads are female, but I think it's thankfully changing. And it's still a pretty young group, because it's still mostly younger people work with new technologies. But again, this is changing as well. But this is how it is right now. Yeah, about the salaries of digital nomads, it's quite difficult to to try to compare salaries of digital nomads, because some digital nomads work as freelancers, so their wage is quite inconsistent. Others run some businesses online. Um, even others work full time or part time for established companies, and they have stable income. And others try to find some local jobs. So it's, like I said, it's a very diverse group. But what I'm trying to say is that it looks like still a very large group earns quite a low income, lower than 10k USD a year, which means that most digital nomads are able to have a pretty good living, especially in places with lower cost of living, like all over the Southeast Asia or Southern America, or even in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. So if you work remotely, you should be able to work pretty much in most places where you would like to, except for the most expensive places like, you know, major cities in the States or Hong Kong and so on. So you should still have a lot of freedom. So how to become one? How to become a digital nomad? So obviously it depends whether you already have a remote job or not. If you don't, or if you want to get a better one, I would highly recommend working on your personal branding. And you know, the easiest way and how to work on your personal branding is to, you know, maintain some professional presence online, either through, you know, posting professional links and articles on your Twitter account or LinkedIn. That counts a lot. It's also very important to try to increase your network. Oops. Yeah, I just got a message that the window was. Yeah. So the percentage from this screen is 16% earns more than 75k a year. So it's quite rare still for people to make more than 75k a year. So this is the number from this slide. Yeah. So back here. So yeah, it's very important to try to network as much as possible, especially, yeah, regardless of where you are. Either, you know. Okay. Let me give me a second. I need to move this window. 1 sec. I can fix this really quick. Okay. Let me see. Make this smaller. I can just close this. Okay, let's continue. I disabled my camera for now so that you can all focus on slides for now, and then I will switch to my camera full screen when we are doing Q&A. Okay, let's carry on. So as I was saying, it's good to do networking, especially if you travel around, if you go to digital nomad hubs, if you go to co-working spaces. It's, you know, you never know who you're gonna meet, and all those connections really matter, and they really value. The other thing is that there's more and more remote job boards with job postings specifically focused on remote gigs. So that's great. I know that there's already a couple of them targeted to the Polish audience, which is great as well. So obviously this entire field is growing, and it's easier and easier to get a remote job. And now with COVID, it's even easier and easier. In case your job or your specialty is still not sufficient to be able to work remotely, there's a number of jobs, most most popular among people working remotely. As you can see, some of them are quite easy to get started with, and the reason why it's often easy is that some fields are changing so rapidly that it isn't really that beneficial if someone has spent, let's say, a couple of years doing a specific thing like being a programmer. Just because the entire field is changing so rapidly, that if you are a newcomer, you should be still able to get started and get up to speed in no time. So I always say that it really doesn't matter when you start. It's important just to get started and just to get going. Most frequently, some jobs are quite are creative. Others rely on social media. I met a lot of programmers working remotely. There are some language teachers running one-on-one meetings online. So you can do all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's quite easy to get started. And another thing is that even if you already work remotely, I would highly recommend you to try to leverage geo-arbitrage. So what's geo-arbitrage? Geo-arbitrage is a term coined by Tim Ferriss, as far as I remember. Tim Ferriss is an author of the 4 Hours Work Week book, and geo-arbitrage is about having a job in the Western world or a well-paid job, and then moving to a place with a lower cost of living. Let's say to even to Eastern Europe, or Poland is even considered a place with low cost of living, or to Southeast Asia, where you can literally spend 10 USD a day and you can get by having street food, and that's totally fine. So it's basically leveraging the fact that you can spend much less and you can save the difference. So that's really powerful. So I would really encourage you to try to leverage that and try to see if you could apply for a job that with one of those companies that can pay you well, and then you can move to a place with lower cost of living. That's a really popular approach. And if we're talking about the geo-arbitrage and moving to places with smaller costs of living, it's thankfully there's more and more communities and websites that can help you get started with finding the best place to go to. And I would highly recommend this website, nomadlist.com, which is a website which lists all those different places with ratings from fellow digital nomads, and you can filter through all those different factors, such as a time zone, or costs of living, or the internet speed, or being LGBT friendly, or whatever else you would like to filter for. So it's a great website, and I found a lot of very interesting places thanks to this website. There's a nice community behind it as well, but I'm gonna talk about it later. Thinking about where would be the best place to go to, I think it's always good to ask yourself this question about what's your favorite place where you would like to be. Some people prefer being in cities, and so as you can see, you can live in Bangkok quite cheaply. Others like islands, so you can go to Thailand, or even Canary Islands. So there's something for everyone, and this is why I love this so much, because literally you can go wherever you want and just be happy because you control your environment. And I often get asked about what are my favorite places. So I love big cities, so that's why I spent half a year in Los Angeles and 3 months in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is such a huge city. It's crazy, but at the same time, I love digital nomad hotspots. Like last year, I spent 2 months in Canggu in Bali. I also love Medellin in Colombia. Huge digital nomad community there as well. A lot of online entrepreneurs, so you can do some networking there as well. I'm in Portugal, so Lisbon is a huge hub as well, but in the South Algarve as well. I just ran into some very nice some very cool communities in Algarve. Lagos Digital Nomads. This is where I'm trying to network right now. So yeah, I love Southeast Asia. I think mostly just because because of the quality of living, low costs of living, and amazing food, amazing people, and the fact that you can travel everywhere so easily. And obviously, there is a catch. Obviously, right now it's more difficult to travel because of COVID, and this is why I changed my approach. And even though before I was usually traveling by plane, buying one-way tickets, I am now doing a road trip. So hopefully, in Portugal, Portugal is also having some restrictions, and I know that later this week we won't be able to go to other parts of the country. We're gonna have to stay in our districts, which is obviously some pain in the back, but it's not that bad. But even with those restrictions, if you try to keep safe, if you watch those restrictions, you should be able to move out and especially within the European Union, it's still quite easy to travel within it as like I did. So right now I'm in Portugal, but before I spent 5 weeks in Mallorca, and that was in August, September. So no problems with that. But of course, yes, I highly recommend being very cautious. And there are also varying different approaches to traveling, and especially if you're starting out as a digital nomad. I understand that some people can worry about whether they're gonna be able to combine traveling and working remotely, just because obviously it's still not easy to find reliable internet connection everywhere. And yeah, I've included this quote from Gary Vaynerchuk: "If you live for the weekends and vacation, your shit is broken." It's funny, but it's true actually. I totally agree, and I think that if you travel, I was traveling for a couple of years back to back. I can only attest to that. The fact that since I'm able to change one called Selena. So Selena is a chain of co-living and co-working spaces, and they are all over. South America, and they're currently starting to move to Europe. So they're getting popular as well, and they're great because you can go there, you can get a room, and you will have a co-working space right next to your room, which is great. So it's a great help as well. And you can also rely on some organized trips, organized groups like this one, Remote Year, which I believe has been just acquired by Selena. So that's also an option if you're worried about the logistics and if you would like to outsource the logistics to someone else. Obviously, among problems that digital nomads need to usually struggle with, it's the ability to focus, especially if you travel to tropical islands or to some new environments that you would like to keep exploring instead of working there. So there, I think it's very worthwhile to invest in learning more about managing your time. I'm not gonna. This is something that you can discover separately, but it helps a lot, especially for me. It helps a lot to use the Pomodoro technique. So it helps if I can focus on let's say for half an hour or an hour of a block, and then I restrict myself to not do anything else. It's very helpful. It's also helpful for me to do intermittent fasting, and I usually try to skip breakfasts, and this let me be so focused every day in the morning. I would highly recommend to check out intermittent fasting. And in general, it's easy to forget about being healthy when you travel. So it's very important to make sure that your workspace is comfortable. So I usually travel with a set of equipment like a laptop stand, an external mouse, an external keyboard, and sometimes an external display as well. You don't want to have a bad pose. You don't want to sit in with a bad posture. So over time, you will understand why this is so important. Also, thankfully, it's also you can usually exercise everywhere as well. Just keeping that in mind, I think is very important. That's why I wanted to include it here as well. And there's a couple of misconceptions about remote work as well. The first misconception is the length of stay. I think most digital nomads that travel long term usually try to stay at the given place at least 1 month at a time, and I find this duration to be the most effective as well, just because this is, I think, the optimal time to learn about a new place where you go to learn where's the local grocery store and so on, or gym, without feeling burnt out. There's a common misconception about problems with communication as well, but this is a problem with how companies work. I think the shift towards working remotely, it's something that needs to happen not only among the workers, the employees, but also the change needs to happen in how companies are being managed. So there's all kinds of different communication patterns or systems that will make it possible to work asynchronously, and I think working asynchronously especially is a great way to maximize the output and the effectiveness of every team. So and some of the best teams I've worked with has been working fully remotely and very often asynchronously as well, so it's not a problem. I promised to recommend some online communities, and the two best communities I could recommend is first one is the one I've already mentioned, which is the Nomadlist, the community behind the nomadlist.com website, and it's a Slack community, and I think they're now moving to Discord. It's one of the biggest one, if not the biggest one. I think second biggest after the DNX. DNX is a German community. So it's great because wherever I go to, I always reach out to people on this Slack community, and I always not only am able to find great tips which save me a lot of time, but also I get to meet some people, hang out with them, and so on. So highly recommended. And then the second one is Facebook groups in general. Very often places where I go to, I try to look for local groups, whether on Facebook or on meetup.com or on other platforms. That's super convenient and helpful as well. They're most up to date when it comes to recommendations, where to go to eat and so on. And also I run my community of my podcast, and I recommend obviously that one as well. I'm trying to popularize the trend of working remotely and being a digital nomad, especially in Poland. Among resources that I could recommend, obviously, there's a couple of books. The 4-Hour Workweek is probably the most popular one, but those 3 websites probably have the biggest number of amazing resources. So I don't even think that there's a point of creating a new list, because those 3 websites are so, they have everything you need. So, all kinds of different tools, online tools that you can use, online communities as well, and other tips. So I highly recommend those 3 websites. So you can check them out. Okay, as I promised, this I think I've covered most of the topics that we've included in the description, but I would like to answer questions from you. So so basically, again, I also I have about 18 episodes of my podcast where I'm trying to answer most frequent questions, so you can check them out. But if you have any other questions about the stuff that I mentioned during my presentation, please go ahead and let's get started with the Q&A. And again, we have 3 books for giveaway. So let's get going. Let's see, one sec. I'm trying to open my YouTube window and I'll try to answer some questions. One second. Okay. Okay. So let's see. Perfect. So, okay. I'm checking the chat right now. Cool. Questions. So Stash is asking, are there digital nomads with families? Great question. So obviously the challenge with traveling with families is the fact that historically homeschooling wasn't really popular, and even though I have met a couple of families and I also have some friends who travel with their families, it was quite difficult or quite controversial sometimes to do homeschooling. Now, obviously, homeschooling or remote learning is getting more and more popular. So, as a matter of fact, here in Portugal, I was hosting some friends, which was my friend with her daughter, and she was attending her classes here as well. So I have met some families traveling together, and I think this trend is gonna only keep on growing as well. But yes, I also agree that because of the logistics, it's a bit more difficult to travel with a family. So I think this is why it's not as common. But yes, I saw families traveling. Let's see. Okay, another question from Stash. What kind of visas do you use as a digital nomad? Do you often visit countries that require going through obtaining a visa or some other residence permit in order to stay? Great question as well. In reality, some countries prohibit you from working remotely while you're there. Especially, let's say, if you have a client in the States, and if you go to the States, you officially aren't supposed to work while you're there. It's illegal. And this is why most people who work remotely and when they travel, they usually say that they're just trying to get the tourist visa. So usually that's not ideal. It's also not fair, I think, because when I travel, I would like to pay taxes to a country where I am. But thankfully, right now, some countries have started working on digital nomad visas. I know that I think Estonia already has one, and I know that Thailand also has some kind of a special program where you can get a visa to stay for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years at a time without having to pay tax on your foreign income if you will go there and if you will work while you're in Thailand. So that's changing, and more countries are working on digital nomad visas. But for now, still most people travel using tourist visas. Questions from Wojciech Kochański. Right. So Wojtek is asking any recommendation for tech companies that support remote work. So obviously, companies very popular among digital nomads are companies with being remote first companies. So that's automatic. So creators of WordPress, they have always been proposing working remotely. Then you have GitLab. GitLab is really pushing forward all those best practices when it comes to working remotely. They have amazing resources on their website as well about remote work best practices and communication patterns and so on. So they're great as well. And now more and more companies from Silicon Valley are migrating to remote work as well. So Twitter, Square, and others. So I think mostly I would recommend Automatic and GitLab as amazing examples of companies that work remotely. Another question, Wojtek is asking, in one of my podcasts I mentioned in the Airbnb problems with Airbnb, problems where Airbnb hosts were canceling stays. Yes. So basically, in one of my podcasts, I have mentioned that when I use Airbnbs, I have noticed a set of recurring problems that happen. So, for instance, there are different ways how hosts can try to get more money from tenants, and I have noticed some bad practices in different countries. So let's say the most popular scam is when, let's say, you booked an Airbnb, let's say a month or two in advance, and you're preparing to go to that country or to that Airbnb, and you go there, and then one day before you come, you get a message saying that, oh, there was a terrible problem in the apartment, like there's a flood or something else, like a pipe problem, and I'm sorry, but I will need to move you to another place. So I have, they leverage the fact that most Airbnb users don't use Airbnb that often and are prone to such attempts to scam them. So most people would try to understand and would try to accept being moved to a different apartment, but in reality, the other apartment is pretty much always smaller or uglier or worse in general, so doesn't really match original photos. So what I always do is I either refuse, or if they don't want to collaborate with me, I then raise the problem to Airbnb support, and the host is supposed to move you to at least the same or a better apartment. So I always raise that to Airbnb. So yeah, don't get scammed. Okay, another question. Stash is asking, how do you typically handle urgent cases on the job? How is it easy for me to stay within the healthy amount of hours during my working week? This is a great question as well, and I think it comes down to the work-life balance. One thing I've learned is that I am trying to actively fight with FOMO, which is a fear of missing out. So when I was starting out as a digital nomad, I always felt that when I started living in this island, let's say I just moved to Koh Tao in Thailand, so I would feel, oh my God, this place is so amazing. I need to spend all of my time to go around. I need to discover all of the different, hidden gems all around these islands. I need to do all kinds of adventures, But then my client work did suffer. So one thing I've learned is to stop feeling bad about not doing things, because I think I'm trying just to be grateful about all the different places where I go to or where I live, and I no longer feel obliged to always do everything that I could do, which means that sometimes I don't do as much as I could, but at least I am, I'm more sane, and at least I can sustain this lifestyle for longer periods of time, and this is why I'm able to work with my clients for a couple of years at a time. But I think that's the only way. Nothing. There's no solution other than working hard, and you need to do your work, and that's true with digital nomads as well. Another question. Let's see. Oh, Wojtek is asking, do I have a family? How this kind of life influences me and my personal situation regarding relations. Good question too. So this is true. Like, if you think about relationships, obviously it's more difficult. It's difficult to find someone who you're able to travel with, just because being a digital nomad is still not that popular. So in the past, when I was living for longer periods of time in a specific place, I was dating partners locally, which is an amazing way of learning more about local places. Um, but yeah, right now I travel with my fiance, so that's solved already. But I know that most digital nomads that I know and who travel are mostly single. So it's definitely easier if you're single or if you're a couple. That's my answer to this question. Łukasz is asking Mac or PC. Yeah, I'm on a Mac. Mateusz is asking. What's the best place to start to check if that lifestyle is for you or not? Yeah, so I think the best way to start is, I think, to go somewhere close by, even to another city close by, like domestically in the same country. And let's say if you live in Krakow, go to the seaside, rent an apartment there for a couple of weeks, see if it will work for you, see if you will be able to work in your Airbnb, or if you will be happy going to a co-working space. If that will work, then you can gradually start traveling further away. And yeah, I think this should help. And my other tip would be to rely on co-living and co-working spaces, as I mentioned previously. They really help a lot now that you won't need to worry about the Wi-Fi or the mobile connection and so on. So that's super helpful as well. Maciek is asking, any recommendations for health or accidents insurance? Yes. So there are two insurance companies specifically targeting digital nomads. The most popular is called Safety Wing, and I know that Safety Wing is super popular. So I can recommend that, and I know that it also covers COVID-19. I also recommend, if you're in European Union, that's easier because you get the ECUS in Polish. So the public, the state, the government, public healthcare, and very often you can get covered with credit cards easily when you go out automatically. And I've been using this insurance from using credit cards in the past, and it's been working just fine. So yeah, that's not a problem with that. So, but otherwise, if you're planning to spend a couple of months during each year, I would recommend looking into Safety Wing. Mati is asking, what is behind me? Yeah, so this is some kind of a sculpture. This is a local Airbnb here in Portugal. But look at this sunset. It's quite amazing. Yeah, so basically this is, I leverage the fact that now with COVID, there's not a lot of people who use Airbnb in places like this, especially in the south of Portugal. So it's very, very easy to try to get better deals on Airbnb, and even 50% of original price and less. So it's a great time to be using Airbnbs. Łukasz is asking, what do I do when in a place where I'm staying the internet is not good enough? I do what I just did. So I use my mobile hotspot, and thankfully, pretty much anywhere you go, literally anywhere you go, the 3G or 4G connections are stable and fast enough to be able to have video or audio calls. So I always use my local SIM card as a backup. In the past, I was always buying local SIM cards in countries where I went to, but now in European Union, the roaming is so cheap that I still use my Polish card whenever I go. So this is what I do most of the time when the Wi-Fi is not fast enough. Wojciech Kochański is asking, what was my worst experience related to this kind of life, or maybe the most dangerous one? I think I'm very lucky in a way about my dangerous situations, because I spent a lot of time in places which I considered quite unsafe. For instance, in Medellin, which is obviously which has a lot of dangerous neighborhoods because of all those gangs. I spent some time traveling around Central America, which is still when you have a lot of drug dealers. In South Africa and Cape Town, which is also super dangerous. So usually it's a common sense just to watch after yourself, not try to not flash with belongings, not to flash with some expensive equipment, like not try to not carry your MacBook on display. So thankfully, knock on wood, I was able to avoid bigger problems. But one time I had a bad experience in Mexico City, that was in Mexico, but in the south of Mexico, in Oaxaca. I went to this small surf town in the south of Mexico, and I was there with some friends, and there was an electricity outage, and the entire town got dark, and we were in this local bar, and we had to go out of this bar and go back to our Airbnb, and suddenly we got mugged somewhere like on the narrow street. Thankfully, nothing bad happened. We got out safe. It's just that we lost one phone, but obviously that's like that's not important. The best thing is that nothing happened to us. But like I said, this was the only bad situation that happened, during 10 years of traveling. So so it's not as bad as you would think, I think. My other bad experiences, sometimes it can get quite stressful to if you need to have a call with your clients, but if you're on an unstable network connection, so sometimes this is when it's hard to avoid that. But okay, so we have winners: Wojciech Kochański, Staś Iwanow, and Maciej Surdziel. Thanks so much for all your questions, everyone. And yeah, I hope you will love your books.